people to help my own son.
I would never do that. I would never do that. And I became that in a matter of minutes when they took my pain pills away.
And I said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be.
This is Faith in Your Recovery. I am Randy Davis. Welcome to the battle. Greetings, and once again, thanks for joining us on our Faith in Your Recovery podcast. My name's Randy Davis. It's a privilege to have you with us. We're pretty pumped about what we have to offer today. Our guest from Michigan, the Detroit area, Matt Grace. Welcome, Matt.
Randy, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege and my responsibility to be here.
Well, we're looking forward to these gifts, those nuggets that you can share with us out of your professional experiences, your personal experiences. It sounds like you've been there in both parts of your life, and we know that you've got a wealth of information. We want to do our best to tap into that. So you tell our listeners why they should stay tuned. What do you have to offer that, you think's unique or special, something that can make a difference?
So there's three themes to the book that I wrote. One being enabling and how families can get in the way of their loved ones getting sober. And I use my own family as an example. Number two would be service and volunteer work and how I've seen it work wonders in people's turnaround and their sobriety. And then the last theme would be a relationship with God or a higher power. And I have a solution for the atheists and agnostics who just will never believe in God.
Okay. As you were sharing that, you mentioned your book. Go ahead and give us the title of that book. Tell us a little bit about what it has to offer.
So it's called God Doesn't Relapse, and Sex, Drugs, and the Life That Almost Killed Me. And I wrote the book because I used to have a private consulting business. And unfortunately, only people with means could afford my services. So I wanted to reach a broader audience and have a direct impact. My book is part memoir and part case study. So what's different about this is that there's one chapter about my life, and then there's an interlude that's italicized in between each chapter. So I weave in my personal life and then my 10,000 plus hours of industry experience. And it's almost like a workbook for families to follow of what families had success and which families did not have success. It's very raw and brutally honest. And if you do read it, there is a transformation. I do experience a transformation, but it comes later in the book. So please don't give up on me.
That's personal transformation you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's very raw, and it can be maybe uncomfortable for some people to read who are ultra sensitive.
I have always said, ask the question, how many times have we stopped one prayer short of getting the answer we want to get? And I'm kind of hearing you say, don't stop one page short of that transformation, because we're going to change gears and kick it up a notch here in a page or two. Is that pretty accurate?
Very accurate.
Awesome.
Yes.
So let's go back to that title, those first three words. God doesn't relapse. Explain that.
So the treatment center industry is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth force. And over the years, I've seen they've come up with external solutions. So for example, antabuse, where someone will take antabuse because it makes them sick when they drink on it. Supposed to make them sick, although I know people who've powered through that. Suboxone, which we heard of, which is an opiate, not blocker. Yes, it's an opiate. It curbs your appetite for opiates and also alcohol. Vivitrol, which is a shot that you can get once a month, and now Sublocade that they've just come out with. And But at the end of the day, my experience is that when you face a catastrophe in your life, and I give examples of one of my closest friend's son who was murdered, brutally murdered, who had 6 years of sobriety, or one of my friends who had to bury his wife and son in the same year, or my friend who didn't pay his taxes for 28 years, and when he got a sponsor and a lawyer, went back to the IRS and made a payment plan. That takes a tremendous amount of courage to go and do something like that. So why God doesn't relapse is when at the most dire time or the toughest parts of our lives, we're going to face a time where God might be the only thing that's standing in between me and a drink. What I'm saying is a pill is not going to save you.
So I don't have the education, don't have the experience you and so many others have, but as you mentioned, the different ways to curb your addiction, the different pills and styles that you mentioned, I have always felt like that was an exchange, almost more than a help. That there's many times, and I realize it may help you survive the moment, but you've still got to break away from that at some point, or you become just as dependent upon it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look at Ozempic. And I know it works for a lot of people, but I'm sure it doesn't fill their spirit. I still, I know someone who is lost all the weight, but is still eating 5 Pop-Tarts a day, right? So that's still not good for you. As you know, a name for alcohol is spirits, right? You can see that over a liquor store. And when you take the alcohol away, you need to replace it with something else. Actually, one of my favorite speakers, I love what he said. He said, if you go to the worst neighborhoods in every city in America, what are the two most prominent things? Churches and liquor stores. Why? Because they both give men hope, one through a bottle and the other through the power of God.
I laugh or smile as you say that because the wife and I have said the same things. You go through a small community, you count 5 carryouts and 5 different churches. And there's a lot of truth in that. What you started speaking a little bit of your own faith there. Matt, how do you think faith plays into recovery? Obviously, you're a man of faith. I can already figure that out. So, how do you play that into recovery or helping someone, a family member who's enabling? How do you use your faith to help them? And, you had the other couple pieces. Obviously, God was their service. That's what the other piece was. Talk to that a moment.
So there's going to be people who listen to this who already believe in God, right? But then there's going to be the atheist and the agnostic that is going to have a hard time intertwining the concept of God into the recovery. And if you look at our country, since the 1930s, this country has become more secular. And what I'm finding is that when I work with men who say that they are really struggling with the concept of God, I say, don't worry about it. Why don't you come volunteer with me? And my mentor said, you don't need a spiritual experience to make a pot of coffee. And he says, you want me to paraphrase that for you? Get off your butt and go help someone. So one of the things I say is that service can become your higher power. And I reference a story about a staunch atheist who was as far away from God as I am close to him. He was a recovered heroin addict. He's been clean for 33 years, does not believe in God, but he has been twice a month taking a meeting into a treatment center for 33 years. Now think about that kind of commitment and that kind of dedication, right? So for people who are really struggling, I often say, that's fine. You don't believe in God? Why don't you come to a soup kitchen with me? Or why don't you do something nice for your grandmother? Or why don't you just get out of yourself and try to do something nice for someone else? Because addiction is all about self-obsession, right? You don't know how bad my life is. If you had my life, you would drink. And service is not a, for anybody who's on medication or they have something that's working for them, service is not a subtraction. I mean, service is an addition. It's an addition to what they're doing. So, for example, I knew a young man who struggled severely with bipolar disorder, and he was a chronic relapser. So my former mentor, my former sponsor, I said, why don't you have him get a service position? So he got a service position on a Tuesday and a Sunday. He's now been sober for 5 years, still takes his medication, which is important to note, but his disposition has changed dramatically. So even with someone who's suffering as terrible with bipolar disorder, people have seen this a spiritual shift, a change in his disposition just for doing something nice for somebody else.
Get
And so
outside.
that's really, I'm trying to reach people who might struggle with the whole concept of God. Now, with enabling, because like I said, I worked with high net worth families, some of the enabling, and my father was my worst enabler. The worst thing that you can do for your kids is to destroy their ambition. And that's what happened to me. I didn't understand the value of a dollar. I did not understand the value of hard work. Everybody in my family tried to intervene on my dad and said, you're killing him. He's 25 years old. Let him try to earn his way in life, right? And there's so many families. So one of the things I say is, I think it's important to understand, is that my book is not an indictment of my father's failures. It's a testament to what can happen if you love someone too much. So I hope you understand the distinction there.
That's an interesting comment. I don't think I'd ever thought in those words of loving someone too much. And I'm not ready to totally accept that, but I can accept the thought we can love anybody in a way that's not healthiest for either one of us. And I think that's very parallel to what I'm hearing from you there. So
Now,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, yeah. So I'll give one case, one example. It might not be relatable to everybody, but there are different levels of enabling. Actually, I'll give you two real quick ones.
Okay.
Have a kid, comes to his father. This is a real life case. Doesn't work, doesn't go to school, is getting high. Dad, I want a BMW, and if it's not this color, don't bother. I mean, imagine that kind of, sounds like a dictatorship. And the dad acquiesced and bought him the car, right? I hope that anybody who's listening or a parent that might be thinking about, if it's not a BMW, it could be a Kia, right? It doesn't matter. It's that parents need to be parents, not friends.
I'm so glad you brought that out. You had mentioned that earlier about your dad, instead of being a father, was a best friend kind of image, okay? And behavioral wise, and that's not what parents were created for.
Correct. And one of the things that really troubled me, that I'm very outspoken about 3, 4 years ago, I read an article in the Detroit Free Press, and it highlighted a mother who was driving her son into the worst neighborhoods so he could buy heroin. So she would drive him down to the bad neighborhood. He would get out, go buy dope. She'd sit there and wait for him. And oftentimes, when he would come back, he would shoot up in the car on the way home. Now, think about that. To me, that is, and this may sound harsh, but those parents who are, especially with fentanyl being laced in everything, a complete game changer today. For a parent to drive their kid to a bad neighborhood and then to let them use drugs in the house with needles, I feel like they should have to dig his grave when he dies. And I know that that's going to cause a lot of people who are saying I don't have empathy, but that is just absurd. I'm sorry.
I agree with you 100%. So we'll both take those letters if they come in, okay?
Yep.
No, I'm behind that. We're just rolling the dice for them. We're spinning that roulette wheel. We're doing it not only for them, but to them. And it can't end in a good way for sure. And there's got to be that point where that's broken. Matt, I read in your bio, you spoke to us about, I guess it's a practice that you've labeled or your program, Saving Grace. Talk to us a little about that.
Well, I started working in the addiction space in 2012. I started for a nationally recognized private practice. And then after a short time, I learned the ropes there and was always grateful to start at that practice. I had a business partner who was a clinical therapist, and we started Saving Grace, which was a practice designed to help high net worth families, specifically those who were dealing with young men who had a failure to launch. So they were floundering. And a lot of it was because the families couldn't get out of their own way. And so I spent 10,000 hours working with men on a one-on-one basis. For instance, one case, I spent 10 days a month, 12 hours a day with one person for an entire year.
Give us those stats again.
10 days a month, 12 hours a day
For
for
one
one full
year.
calendar year. Yep.
So you're looking at 120 days thereabouts. So that kind of time's 1/3 of the year. That yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was rewarding and exhausting, but
Had to be.
I use that family. As a matter of fact, they give a testimonial. They're very public, and they have been about their own name. They're willing to talk to other families, so they don't hide. I think that's one of the biggest. You know, my dad wanted to sweep my addiction under the rug. He wore rose-colored glasses, and families think, oh, okay, you just take my son or my husband or my daughter, you just take them to get fixed, and we'll just do what we do. Well, that's not how the family's supposed to recover. The family has to look at their own behavior. And this family became the gold standard of my practice because here is a man worth a lot of money, 4 homes, private jet, Harvard grad, Wharton grad, who said to me, Matt, I don't know what to do. Help me. You know, I can count on my hands, not that many times where a powerful, powerful man who is basically stuck in their ego uh, really can't get out of their own way to let the professionals come in and help. But because this mother and father spent a year in family therapy, so what they did is they saw a therapist by themselves, and then they also had a group session with their son who would come in. They learned how to communicate with each other. The family was in shambles. And because the family was willing to address the situation and learn how to create boundaries. See, families don't know how to set boundaries, and boundaries save lives. And so this family, he now has 12 years of sobriety. His dad is his best friend. He's got a wife and 2 kids. And when I first started with him, his father said if I asked him to come to work at 8:30 in the morning and move a pencil from one desk to the other, he couldn't do it.
We've gotten ourselves in big issues when that becomes any kind of a norm. I would be interested to know some of the commonalities and some of the differences in dealing with these high profile, these privileged versus those who don't even know what a privilege is. Kind of give us that medium in there that'll explain.
So
that.
the family that I touched on, the mom who was driving her son to the bad neighborhoods, that was a very blue collar family. Okay, not a lot of money, but as you can see, that enabling now the family with means, you know, they were enabling in a different way, right? His son had an American Express black card that he was spending $20,000 a month on, that his father was just wiping clean. right? So there's no life lesson in that. If you're not working and you're getting high all day at home and your dad is still paying your credit card bill, where's the life lesson? Now you can swing the pendulum to the mother who was driving her son into the bad neighborhood, very, very blue collar, working class family without a lot of money, but still just as dangerous and just as sick. So you don't have to have money to be an enabler.
It just happens in a different way when you do have it.
Yes.
So I want to go to something, reading up on you. You've got some different ideas, perhaps, or at least share your ideas of the meaning. And we basically know, but talk to us about rock bottom. How do you see rock bottom? What is it? What's it look like? I know that's going to vary with individuals, but what is it psychologically and in the sense of recovery? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
So I think it's a good thing. And as a matter of fact, in a certain literature, there's a line which I love, and it said, unfortunately, many of us have to be badly mangled to recover. And when I think of the word mangled, I think of the car that I wrapped around another car during a blackout, right? You can kind of visualize that I, at 60 miles an hour during a blackout, slammed into a parked F-150 and totaled both cars, right? You can think of the metal, right? And just the collision being mangled. And so I had to, it's unfortunate because addicts have a very high threshold of pain. And for me, it almost killed me, and unfortunately, it kills many. But I had wrecked cars, wrecked relationships, lying, stealing, manipulating. I actually OD'd. I used to be a TV reporter for ABC in South Texas, and I showed up to work one morning and OD'd in the newsroom. I had been up all night, and at 7:30 in the morning, I drank a half pint of vodka and took 100 milligrams of OxyContin. And when I showed up to work, I collapsed and started vomiting everywhere. And by the grace of God, I stopped breathing. But by the grace of God, I had acute alcohol poisoning, and so I started vomiting everywhere. And you would think that that would be enough to scare me, but that wasn't as you know from doing these type of podcasts, that was just a little blip, not even a speed bump. So eventually, it came down that I wanted to die. I started having thoughts of suicide on a regular basis. And I was 29 years old, living at home with my mom. And she had one rule: no drugs, no alcohol. And if you're not going to be home, you got to call. Well, I disappeared on a 3-day crack and alcohol binge. I came home on October 2nd, 2004. I walked inside. My mom started sobbing and said, "Oh my God," because I weighed 129 pounds. And I just looked like I had been on a bender. Then she gathered herself and said, "If you're going to die, it's not going to be in this house. Get out. I am changing the locks." And so I knew she meant business. And so that's why I'm so passionate about instilling boundaries. I'm not recommending that families just throw someone out, because I'm getting a lot of negative comments about that. But I will tell you this: my parents gave it 13 years, right? 13 years of lies, manipulation. I held them hostage for 13 years. And guess what? Families have the right to live a nice life. I showed no willingness whatsoever to get sober. And my family had enough, right? And they drew a line in the sand and they held the line. And so that's an extreme case, but I think that it's important to love people from a distance, right? What does that look like? If you're a family, I don't think it's acceptable to let your loved one get high all day and do nothing in your home, right? There's no meaning, there's no purpose to that life. So there has to be some boundaries that are in place. So rock bottom for me was that I wanted to kill myself. My mom allowed me to stay and said, "You can stay as long as you go to a meeting," which I did not want to do. So I went to a meeting and saw a group of men. They were all smiling and laughing except me. And I wanted what those guys had, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. They had balance. They re-entered society, high character individuals who were not drinking. And that's a gift, and that's what I wanted. Now they kept saying, have you tried getting on your knees to pray? And as someone who was raised Jewish, I said, oh, you don't tell me how to pray. I'm chosen. I tell you how to pray, right? And you could see kind of the arrogance in that. And I was taught as a young kid, my father said, son, Jews don't kneel. And so that is bad advice, and I'll tell you why. It almost killed me. I believe that when I got on my knees for the first time at 6:30 in the morning, October 3rd, 2004, and I said, God, if you don't show yourself, I'm going to kill myself. And I had a rifle sitting next to me. The room lit up. I had a white light spiritual experience for 25 minutes. And the obsession to use drugs and alcohol was removed from me instantaneously. And my life has never been the same. Now, most people don't have that kind of white light, but I'll tell you why I believe, God doesn't relapse. My sponsor, who was the truest definition of an agnostic, an engineer. I mean, this guy, paralysis analysis, right? I mean, just every little thought in his mind had to be measured. He got on his knees every morning and every night for 8 months until he felt something. So I think one of the problems is that as addicts, we're undisciplined and we want what we want when we want it. And so when God doesn't work like that, like a pill or a bottle or a needle does, then we don't, you can't quit before the miracle.
What? I'm trying to search for the best way to ask this. You also made a comment that you believe that recovery of any type takes courage. You touched on that a little bit ago. You call rock bottom the birthplace of strength. And we know all rock bottoms are at different levels, different styles. Is there any such thing as finding recovery without a rock bottom? Or does everybody have one and some just aren't as deep, as painful as others?
That's a great question. 100% it can look different for everybody. So back when AA first started, in a piece of literature, they said that these men were called last gaspers, right? I love that term because I'm a last gasper. For me to drink is to die. Like when I put alcohol into my body, I have to go through a detox, right? These men were being scraped off the sidewalk. Well, today with the advent of the treatment center industry and millions of therapists and many different therapeutic modalities, it's raised the bottom, if you will. And so not everybody is going to be smoking crack and using crystal meth and drinking 24 hours a day like me. There are different levels of addiction. And so the answer is no. There are people, listen, I think it's important to know if anybody's listening or will listen to this is that my recovery is not the same as yours, right? You can have, your recovery can be different because everybody has a different story, right? There's the father a man who has the family is still intact, the white picket fence, the cars, the garage, the job, right? And he's able to somehow get sober, not doing the things that I have to do. So, which is fine. But in my lived experience of 21 years, I will say that the people who have been dragged through the mud and have just been kicked in the face, it's my experience that they have to put more effort into the recovery than the man who has not lost much at all. Does that if that can make sense to you? Some people have to do more than others.
It just sounds to me like even at their bottom, they're closer to recovery than that one who has really lived life in the ditch or in a ditch style.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yep.
it's just a shorter journey back. you alluded to this earlier. I'm big into this as far as ministry goes. Let's talk a little more about service.
Mm.
Uh, what does what does service truly do for us? I'm sure it builds self confidence because you get that pat on the back. Hey, buddy, thanks for shoveling the drive for me. When you maybe never had that pat on the back before. But walk with us through some of that, please.
Service saved my life. I felt I had this attitude that the world owed me something. Growing up in privilege, having opportunities that most people don't have. I grew up in a bubble, right? So there's 8 Mile Road. It's a famous mile road in Detroit. And on one side of 8 Mile, you have people who are thriving. And on the other side, you have Detroit. It's getting better now, but Detroit looked like an atom bomb went off, like a zombie apocalypse. And so when I got into service, it got me out of myself. So one of the things that addicts and alcoholics deal with is depression, no hope, no faith. They think that their lives cannot get better. And there's just something very special about taking 1 hour to go try and help someone else. And I was actually challenged by a man. I had 10 months of sobriety, and he called me into his office and he said, "I want to know why you're not giving back anything to the program that saved your life." So here's in 21 years where alcoholics are hypersensitive. We have problems with authority, and we have problems of just taking direction. And so this man had the courage to challenge me because he saw that my program or my spiritual experience that I had was running out. That white light that I experienced was like, it's like a loaf of bread, right? So eventually that bread is going to get stale if you don't eat it. And so my spirit was starting to suffer, and I had a man who had the courage to call me out, who cared more about my relationship with a higher power than my feelings, and challenged me to do more service. And my life has never been the same. And when my father passed away, I had 11 years of sobriety, and it was the best day of my life and the worst day of my life. The best day because my father knew that I was sober and my affairs were in order, which is a gift for a parent, to die knowing your son is sober and your life is in order. It was the worst day because I lost my best friend. Now, I tried to buy happiness. I drifted into a deep depression. Okay. And I bought my dream car. I bought a home. I bought watches. I bought clothes. I joined a country club. I started traveling. I tried to outrun the spiritual desolation that I was experiencing. And I want to be careful. I don't ever want to say that. I mean, having money is a gift, right? It pays for health care, right? I think it's important to be able to take care of your family. But all of those things that I thought would make me happy did not do one dent of any good. And it wasn't until I recommitted to service. Oh, by the way, I sold the car 8 months after I bought it because it did nothing for me.
It did not fulfill.
Nothing. Then I said, you know what? I got to get out of this. And so I already had the tools, right? I started getting involved in service again. And I want to talk about why I'm trying to inspire other people to be of service. I started volunteering at a woman's home in the city of Detroit. Okay. I had 14 years of sobriety at the time, feeling sorry for myself, comparing myself to my friend who maybe has more, always looking at someone else's plate instead of being grateful for what I have. These are the worst of the worst scenarios. These are young girls who've been sex trafficked and abused, the worst stories that I've ever heard. And I had another spiritual experience when I started going back there because a lot of people lack perspective about what's going on in the world. There's people living paycheck to paycheck, people who don't have family, people who are really on hard knocks. And I became enlightened, and I felt that as someone who comes from privilege, I wanted to demonstrate to God that I'm so grateful for the abundance that was given to me, and that I'm making it a mission to be a mentor, not just to men in recovery, but charities need checks, but men need mentors. And right now, there's a crisis for young men in the country. And I saw in a video or a podcast a man by the name of Scott Galloway. He said, if you go to a morgue, 4 out of the 5 suicides are young men.
Yes.
And that there's a crisis for young men in this country who need mentorship. And so my book, yes, is about service, addicts helping addicts. But I think that the world would be a better place if everybody just took 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours a month and just volunteered to help someone who's less fortunate.
I'm glad you threw that in, because I wanted it known we're not just talking addicts here. Service, it should be a part of our being. It's in our DNA. We need to express it in our actions and all that go with that. Matt, we're down here to the last 6, 7, 8 minutes. What would you like to share with the folks? And go ahead and tell us how we can get a hold of your book, please.
Sure. So my website is mattgrace.com. So there'll be links at my website, which would take you to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, or you could go straight to Amazon and buy God Doesn't Relapse there. Now, I am doing something called the National Sobriety Tour.
Thank you.
And I decided that at least until the book publishes, and maybe after, I haven't decided yet, I'm traveling across the country and I'm speaking for free. Anybody who comes to listen, they will get a sponsored copy of the book after it publishes. And so I'm doing this because times are so tough right now, and I believe I was spared for a purpose, to be of maximum service to humanity. I was a taker at the highest level, and I just feel this calling to to travel and to try to help as many families as possible. So you can go to mattgrace.com. There's a drop-down box that says National Sobriety Tour. You can put your name and information and email address and phone number in there. I will get a copy of the email, and my PR manager will get a copy. And if there's any nonprofits that are listening, I'm looking to donate books as well.
I can tell you, you'll be hearing from A Better Life, Brianna's Hope. I want to get to that website, look into it. Love to have you in our area, see what we can do. So thanks for that offer. Thanks for what you're doing. And thank you. Thank you for your time today. Is there anything you want to close with? We've got about 4 minutes here.
Yes. Recovery takes place when nobody's looking. And so what do I mean by that? You can go to meetings, and you can go to therapy, and you can do equine therapy to pet a horse if it makes you feel better. There's all these things, but if you've really done a muck of your past, I just want to share a quick story, and I'll expedite it. I had a friend who was facing 10 years in prison. He fled the state of Michigan, moved to Washington. He got arrested in Washington, and they called Michigan for 23 straight days and said, if you don't come get this guy, we're going to let him loose. 10 years he was facing. They let him out. He said, I'll never go back to Michigan again. Well, his father became gravely ill, and he took a look in the mirror and he said, he's very close to his parents. And he said, is it worth facing 10 years in prison to see my dad one last time? He came back to Michigan, threw himself at the mercy of the judge. The judge was so impressed by his character and his willingness to face his past She gave him 6 months of work release. So he lived in jail at night and worked during the daytime and was able to be a part of his father's last breaths. That is sobriety. Okay? I follow character. And I tell that story in my book, and I share other people's stories because they are monumental and so inspiring. And that takes a lot of courage to face 10 years in prison to say goodbye to your father one last time. Most people will not do that.
You know, that's about as opposite of enablement as you can get, to put yourself on the line to be able to be there for and with someone else. I love the lesson, the integrity of that, and that man's courage. We can all use a dose of that. Matt,
And he's sober because of that act.
yeah, wow. It's been a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for your witness, your testimony, your love for God, your ministry, your work, being there for others and with others. God bless you. I'm sure we'll be in contact in the future. As I always like to tell our folks, stay in the battle. God loves you. We love you. Come back and join us again. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Randy.